Long before the revolution, in 1789, the Qajar dynasty of Iran was established after the fall of the Safavid dynasty. This dynasty did pretty well for themselves for over a century, until the dawn of the 20th century when a revolution took place in the dynasty, which ended in the country being in the hands of the Shah. In 1919, just after the end of World War I, the British Empire tried to establish a protectorate in Iran in exchange for military and financial aid to the dynasty. The Shah at the time refused to offer, and the British were very irritated by this. In 1921, Britain advised and funded Reza Shah in his attempt to overthrow the Qajar dynasty. The British wanted to overthrow the Qajar so that they could have easier trade routes to the British Raj, and also so they could have a man in charge of Iran who would give them good deals for oil. It was ultimately successful, and Reza Shah created a dictatorship. Afterward, the Shah crushed independence movements and Republican and communist rebels. 4 years later, in 1925, the Shah took the dictatorship one step further by making himself the king of Iran. Following his ascension to divine rule, the Reza Shah created an authoritarian Iran with certain values. They valued militarism, nationalism, secularism, and anti-communism. The Shah is sympathetic to Germany during World War II and has German advisors in Iran, so the British invaded to overthrow him as well as get the oil in hopes that the Germans don't get hold of them first. He is replaced by his western-leaning son Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. This was a good example of how Iran began to feel the immense gravity of European imperialism, as the British saw Iran as another opportunity to take advantage of a nation's natural resources for their own benefit. After the war, the new Shah established a constitutional monarchy and took a hands-off approach to governing, but the country's democracy was unstable and from 1947 to 1951 saw 6 prime ministers in power. In the same year, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, with parliament approval, nationalized Iranian oil. The Shah then removed him in 1952, but a popular uprising made the Shah put him back in power. In 1953, with CIA and MI6 support, the Shah launched a coup to re-strengthen the monarchy, which he defeated Mossadegh. In exchange, he let America and Britain use Iranian oil. In 1961, under the White Revolution, the Shah heavily modernized Iran. He introduced agrarian, economic, social, and administrative reform to improve the country, and was overall economically successful. In 1963, the Shah arrested an Islamic cleric named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Many Islamic people were not very happy and rioted. Later in 1964, Khomeini was released and exiled. At the beginning of 1978, many people took to the streets to protest the Shah. The Shah was not liked because he was seen as westernized to some, and was not liked by the religious. In early 1979, the Shah left the country and went to Egypt. In February, the military declared neutrality. On April 1st, a referendum was held, and overwhelming people voted to make Iran an Islamic republic. Khomeini would then take power until he died in 1989. Khomeini was the leader of the Iranian Revolution who overthrew the Shah in 1979. He also became the first leader of the new Islamist regime and was the first in line to take charge of the aftermath of the civil war. Preceding the institution of the new government, he executed people who previously worked for the Shah and imprisoned and suppressed the remaining opposition. Khomeini moved Iran from a pro-Western government down a different path that excludes the influence of both major powers, which are the USA and USSR at the time. The Iranian hostage crisis from 1979 to 1981 was when Iranian militant students took 66 American hostages and did not release 52 of them until 1981. This was because of anti-American sentiment and to force the Americans to send the Shah back to Iran. The US responded by stopping all trade with Iran, severely hurting the economy. Jimmy Carter attempted negotiations at first, but they went nowhere. Later in late 1980 and early 1981, negotiations got somewhere. On January 20th, 1981, minutes after Reagan was named president, the negotiations went through and the hostages were released. The Iran-Iraq War was fought between 1980 and 1988. The instability of the Iranian Revolution gave the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, a perfect chance to invade Iran and take over the Iraqi-claimed region of Shatt al-Arab. Besides historical and cultural regions, Hussein wanted the oil in there. In 1980, Iraqi troops crossed the border. Iraqi troops were on average better than their Iranian counterparts, but Iran had a bigger population to mobilize. Iraq took some lands in the beginning. Iran then, within 2 years, pushed back into the land and bits of Iraq. The war was infamous for using chemical gas and child soldiers. Eventually in 1988, with the stalemate still going on both sides, signed a peace deal ending the war.